Hey everybody, today I'm taking a look at Rise, which is a 2 to 4 player board game designed by Remo Consadori and Marco Pranzo. This one takes around 60 to 90 minutes to play on average. Now before I get started on my review of Rise, I want to give a shout out to the show sponsor KIENDA.co.uk, which is the place that I bought Rise from. And if you use my link in the show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. So Rise is a game all about climbing tracks, and during setup you're going to have all of these boards here placed in any orientation you like, so they are double-sided to give you a ton of replayability, and all these tracks do different things and they synergize with each other in different ways, and of course we'll touch on that in a bit. So you have the scoreboard here, you have your coins, and you also have the main kind of action selection system here, which is this other track, I suppose, of cards. You have your player pieces as well as the separate decks of cards here, the event cards, and these kind of action cards which are put in a tiered deck, so they would stack on top of each other, so they get progressively more powerful as the game goes on. Each player is also going to start with some money as well as a bank here, which shows how much money you can carry through one round to the next. So you're actually going to start with a capacity of carrying 5 coins from one round to the next, but you can upgrade that to 10. So the game itself is actually very simple to play, and you have this very nice little turn structure key here to show you what to do. So the first thing you're going to do is you are going to take income, and you're going to take income based on this track here. So you can see here that we're going to start with an income of 1, but you can progress to get more and more income, not only in money, but also in points. But that does come with a deficit as well, which we'll touch on in a little bit. Then you're going to put the new cards out on the display. So again, you're going to put the 3 event cards as well as the 4 action cards for the round, and then you're going to go into the main action part of the game, which is when you're going to select which action you want to take. So starting with number 1 here, you are going to allocate your little factory on which card you want to use. And you can see here that the further along you go, the more expensive it's going to be. So to go to this spot, it's going to cost me 2 coins. To go to this spot, it's going to cost me 3. But the advantage of doing that is that for every event that you pass, you are going to be able to use that event's ability, such as getting more money, more points, getting even more money there, but potentially going down on this track, getting points and lots of different ways and different benefits you can get. So let's just say, as an example, I wanted to go here like this. I'll put my piece like that, and then it would go to the next player, and of course this player would have to pay this fee. So let's just say the red player wanted to go here without putting much thought into it, and then the blue player also wanted to share this spot with the yellow like this. Now if you ever use the same card as somebody else, then the player who's gone there just before you, as in the yellow player here, will get to trigger a book token which they were given at random at the start of the game. At least a starting tile, but there are ways to get more of these. And these are kind of little bonus actions you can do, again, to move up the corresponding tracks. And once you've allocated all the player pieces and paid your costs, you're going to resolve these cards from left to right, ignoring any action cards that haven't got anybody on them, but you will always trigger the event cards. Like for example here, this will give you a point if you are the furthest along this track here, the happiness track, and then the red player will resolve his action. And you can see here that's often when it comes to these action cards, you have 2 options. You always have 2 options, one of which is free, and the other one often costs money or comes with a deficit. So you can see here, I can move 1 up this kind of politics track, or I can move 2 up the politics track, but lose a happiness point to do that. And you can see the card here, I can go 1 up the science track, or I can pay 2 coins and go 2 up the science track. Now let's talk about what all these tracks do and how they work. So these tracks aren't in a particular order, so they might be all over the place, but you'll get the gist. So the first one here we've already touched on, which is the income track. And as you progress up it, you'll get more income during the income phase, but you'll also go down on the environment board, which is this one here, which can be a bad thing, because if you go too far, you can lose the option to use your book tokens, which can be very useful, or you can gain 2 of these kind of revolt points, which again can really hurt you at the end of the game. And if you keep pushing too far down and neglect this track too much, then you can lose 5 points each time you do that. But in adverse to that, you can push really high up and start gaining points. You have this kind of top hat track here, which is a nice one to get loads of points, because the further you go, the more points you get at the end of the game. But they'll also give you benefits as you go, such as getting you more money. Getting you, this one forces you to go down on one of these boards. This one here lets you use a book token or refresh all your book tokens to be used again. It lets you go up on these tracks. If you reach these checkpoints and you're the first to do it, you'll get more points, get wild actions, and so on. Next up, we have this track here, which kind of is a thing you kind of charge up, I suppose. The further you go, you'll get better actions. But when you want to, anytime, you can cash them out and go back to the beginning. But when you do that, you'll get to refresh all your book tokens, which, I don't want to underplay how important that is, because you always want to have an option to use those book tokens. You got the science track here, which is basically a linking track. So whenever you push up the track, you'll take the corresponding action, which will push you up all the other tracks. So very simple one there. And at certain checkpoints, you can get a big bunch of points there. You've got the kind of culture track here, which is a little bit like the science track, which again will synergize with all of the other ones. You have the little kind of newspaper, or the little research track here, which means that you can just take bonus actions as you go, but you have to kind of commit to it for a short period of time. So let's just say I wanted to go this way. I could go up the culture track, then I could go up the kind of learning track, get 2 points, and then reset and go to another one if I wanted to. But you cannot share spots with anybody else, and you'll jump over them if you were sharing a track with somebody else. This one here will allow you to get more book tokens the further you go. You're collecting them as you go along, and when you get to this point, you can use them, and whenever you get right to the top, you can keep on reusing your books. You've got the happiness track here, which gives a lot of points at the end of the game, or loses you a lot of points at the end of the game if you go too far down, or if you go upwards, that's going to be a good thing because you get a ton of points there. And also at the end of each round, you get to gain a point if you are the furthest along that happiness track, or joint furthest. And alternatively, you can always cash in victory points to get money, because money can be tight in this game depending on where you sit on that track. So the higher up you are, you get a much better conversion rate with points to money. And I think the final track here is this one, which will grant you the ability to take these action cards without paying for them the further you go. So if you see I reach up to this point here, I will be able to buy up to that third card without having to pay those fees. But that comes with a forfeit as well, because you're going to start gaining unhappiness points as you go. And that is essentially how the game works. Once you've done those 4 things, done the resolved all the action cards, you'll go into a bit of an admin phase where you get points based on certain things you've done, i.e. being highest on the happiness track. You'll always discard money in surplus to what you've got on your storage area here. Bearing in mind, again, you can upgrade that if you want to on this part of the track here. And then you'll go again for the next round, and you're going to play 12 rounds of that. I think it's 4 in each of the kind of tiers of the deck. Bearing in mind that in the kind of third era of the game, the actions are going to be much more powerful, where you can do multiple things at once, going 4 up the culture track. So it definitely does have a good forward arc to it, and you're going to get more and more powerful. And at the end of the 12 rounds, after calculating the points you've got during the game, adding any points you've got at the end game or end game scoring, the player with the most victory points will be the winner. Okay, so let's share some thoughts on Rise, and let's start with the main action selection system here, which I think is fantastic. It's so simple, but really clever, and adds some pretty interesting decisions in to the mix, because sometimes there might be an option or an action that you're really looking for that's quite far down the track, which is a good thing because it's going to be a lot cheaper or even free. But at the same time as that, you don't want to be missing out on these events a lot of the time, because these events can sometimes be better than the actions themselves, or sometimes there might even be an action that you really want, but it's going to be on the right-hand side of a negative event, such as getting you, the revolt points, whatever, because some of these are purely negative, like this one here. But at the same time, some of them are purely positive, and you don't want to miss out on them when other players are, getting granted those rewards. And at the same time, the turn order is important, because you being first can mean that if somebody goes to the same card after you, then you'll get to trigger one of your book tokens. And those utilizing these book tokens as much as possible is a big part of the game. So there's definitely layers to the decision making here. You're keeping money back, knowing when to spend it, and knowing what income you're going to get, because you don't want to be wasting money and being inefficient if you can only carry a certain amount of money to the next round anyway. So yeah, definitely loads of interesting decisions here. That's in a really simple framework, And I actually like the way that the cards don't by default get better as they go, because again, it adds a bit more interesting dynamic into the mix there. But despite me really liking the action selection system here, of course the main talking point are the tracks themselves. You know, I tend to love tracks in games. I know a lot of people think it's a purely mechanical thing, which it is, and they become a bit disengaged from games where there clearly isn't a theme there. But for me, this is like, this has me salivating. I love tracks. I love tracks that link with each other and they can trigger each other. And this game just has that in spades. And I like the way that there's not like a default thing here where you just want to push as far as you can. Sometimes pushing on one track can push you back on another track, which can have a kind of cascading effect, which might actually hurt you. So sometimes doing things at the right time is just as important as just pushing forward gung-ho at all times. And some of the kind of combos and the domino effects you can get with these tracks is absolutely satisfying, or so much fun when you manage to do an action which will trigger one thing, that will trigger another thing, that will trigger another thing, which will let you trigger your books, which will let you then move up another track, which will then let you refresh your books, and so on. So it definitely has that almost roll and write feel with something like, you know, GEEKNSON Clever or something like that, where it's just a constant, almost like a pinball machine, where it's like ding, 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 and everything is ticking off at once. And before you know it, you even had a better action than you first anticipated. This, for me, I love it. It makes me feel happy, and I just leave the game feeling immensely satisfied when you pull off those huge turns. And the potential to do that in this game is up there with like any game I've ever seen. Now, despite me really liking that part of the game, I do have to say that sometimes it can be a bit difficult to track what you've done, because you are taking almost breaks in your main action to trigger other actions, and that can kind of make you go down a bit of a rabbit hole and lose track to where you started with in the first place. So, for example, if you move 4 up a certain track, you might go up, say, 1 up this track here, stop and do this action, and then you remember you've got 3 actions left, which will get you a point, and then you've got another action, which will then let you go up that track again, which might trigger another action. And again, before you know it, you can lose track of what you've done. So you do need to be quite vigilant and maybe work with your opponents to remember what you've done. And I know that some players don't like that kind of thing, because it can make you go down a bit of a rabbit hole and lose track of things. But I personally like that, and I'm willing to put in the work to make sure the admin is, admin is correct, and that nobody is wasting turns or taking extra actions. I do also have to say that I feel like some of these tracks are more interesting than others, and there's probably going to be a couple that I'll usually focus on as my main strategy each time I play. But you can, again, flip them to the other side and probably find an orientation of boards that more suits your needs and that you're going to find a bit more interesting. But I do like the fact that there are a ton of variations here, and I suppose the variables on the board setups is just massive. And it's also one of these games that I feel like expansion material could come into this game pretty seamlessly, at pretty low expense as well. Just, kind of mess with the boards a little bit, change it, spice it up a little without changing that main framework. So it feels like the longevity here could be huge if the game is supported by the publisher. The game scales very nicely from that 2 to 4 player count. And I do like the fact that when it comes to a 2-player game, that if you use any card to a previously placed piece, then you'll get to use one of your book tokens. So it just adds that little bit more tension into a 2-player game without having to fit on the exact same card as somebody else to trigger that book token. But it definitely moves along at a brisk pace. There's not too much downtime, even though you can sometimes get those really massive turns. But they don't happen all the time, and sometimes, more often than not, you are taking kind of incremental jumps up these tracks rather than those huge, massive turns. I'm happy with the way the game is produced. I think it looks very nice. The game can be a bit of a table hog due to the the modularity of the boards here. You're going to have to position them in a way that suits your your playing surface. But that's a small nitpick and probably comes as part of the game, because you can't make this game without that modularity. The artwork is nice. The cards are nice and clear, and the iconography in general is top notch. I did not once have to find myself referencing any rules in the rulebook once I learnt it for that first time. So yeah, the card stock is fine, but you're not going to be shuffling these often anyway. So yeah, I'm generally happy with the way the game looks and the way it's produced, and it's just a nice product. Okay, so let's share some final thoughts on Rise, and boy oh boy do I love this game. It is so much fun from the get-go. Sometimes you even forget that this is like an hour and a half game, because I'm so engrossed and just thinking about what's going to happen next. A truly engaging design here. Now, that being said, I am biased because I love tracks in games. Most of my favourite Euros have some degree of track use in them. And I just feel spoilt for choice in this one. But yeah, I completely appreciate that it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea because, again, it is so abstracted and it is basically moving things up tracks. But if you do like that style of thing, I have no doubt that you will like this game. Again, it has that roll and write feel to it. The combos you can get are just huge and it just feels so good. And when all those things trigger and you have those massive turns. The action selection system itself is so clean, but it's so thinky and interesting. And yeah, I love this system as well. I'm surprised it's not been used before. And yeah, it just works. It just works. It's crisp and clean and without being convoluted, but still interesting. And everything about it, I think, is great. This is a real kind of throwback feeling game for me. Not convoluted, but it has enough going on and it's just fun. So yeah, this for me is probably one of my favorite games of 2022, if not my favorite. I mean, close competition between this one and Teletum for a #1 place. And it just kind of came out of nowhere for me because I didn't know what the premise of this game was. I knew it was all about climbing tracks, but the general kind of feedback I got from reviewers and content creators for that is it's okay. For me, this hits the perfect sweet spot, and I didn't just like it, I loved it. And yeah, I really am looking forward to playing it more and more and more, and mixing and matching all these player boards. And I really hope this game is supported in the future because I want to see more boards and more combos. So those are my final thoughts on Rise, a chairman's commendation for sure.